Welcome to the Run Radio podcast. My name is Trina, and my guest today, writer Alexandrea Dotcheva. Welcome.
Thank you, Trina, for having me. Glad to be here.
So you've got a lot of experience with holistic practices. You've written a book. How did all this start for you?
Well, it actually started in childhood when I lost my confidence in many ways. Some of it was self-inflicted, other not so much, but at any rate, I struggled with this lack of self-esteem and self-confidence for over 20 years until I decided to put an end to it. When things spiraled down very fast and I realized I couldn't tolerate this anymore, and I was the only person who could change things, right? And then 15 years ago, I changed professions. I had been a musician professionally for 29 years. I hit an early midlife crisis at 32. The profession was no longer very applicable and manageable in the United States. So I put myself through nursing school, and then I went into real estate investing. And finally, the confidence built gradually by solving the problems I had, but I had to face every single issue I had. I read a lot of books. I listened to many inspirational videos, of course, but ultimately I was the person who had to face every single problem that I had created 90% of the time. And once you admit this to yourself, then you start solving issue by issue. And it is a lengthy process. It's not a quick process, but eventually people started saying, you really need to write about this, because as I was mentoring people in investing and then teaching them about confidence and health, of course, because I'm a nurse and a health freak, to serve as an example to my patients and loved ones. So the system gradually emerged because I understood that I had to organize my methods in a way that would help other people practice the way to be successful financially, health-wise, and in their relationships. Because when you want to be successful in your health and finances, you will also have to be very choosy and careful with your relationships, because people influence you in ways that you may or may not want. And this was also very important. So the book came very naturally after a friend of mine suggested you really should put all this in a book, and it can help others overcome fears and insecurities and many, many things. So that's how it's happened.
You said you lost your self-confidence as a child. Do you feel like there was a point where you did have it and lost it, or did it just never develop to begin with?
Oh, I was a very confident child when I was very little, until about age 11. And then things happened that I didn't want to happen in the way I was socially awkward. And I realized this when I was 11. So at that point, I decided to have very low expectations of anything that happens with me, to not only that, but to always expect the worst. And I solidified this, I internalized this whole mindset over the years by always deliberately emphasizing the downsides of any event rather than emphasizing the advantages or the positive side. I was influenced by a family member in that way, and not deliberately, but you follow examples when you're a child, right? You're very impressionable, and you have role models that you choose or choose not to follow. So I chose a role model that was a very smart person, extremely intelligent, caring, loving, and all that. However, with a poor outlook on life. And I thought that was cool at the time. And I stood out from my classmates, from all the other children my age. And I really thought that was a very smart thing to do, until in my late 20s and early 30s, it dawned on me that was really not the smartest thing to do. And I had dug myself into this hole, which influenced my professional life. It reflected on everything, my personal life, my other relationships. It was just not a good decision, and it had to be dealt with.
A lot of times in our 20s, we're kind of still coming into our own. So for you to recognize that early, that you needed to make some changes, was there something specific that flipped that switch for you, or was it a culmination of things?
There was a specific switch when two of my close friends who were also violinists like me, they were better violinists than me. They went into drastically different professions, nothing to do with music. So that was the slap on the face. And I hit the rock bottom by understanding that all my work, it was 26 years at the time, And by the time I entered the workforce as a nurse, it was 29 years. But the decision to switch professions was a very difficult and necessary thing, because I knew I had developed a bad mentality history with the violin and stage fright and self-doubt. And when I realized the profession was no longer sustainable, because on top of that, many orchestras had started to bankrupt in the United States. Well, that was what prompted my two friends' decisions to change careers in the first place. But when I saw that I wasn't even as competitive as they were, and combined with my lack of confidence, it became very clear to me that should I want to change my life and switch careers, I also had to completely revise and reevaluate my mindset. Because see, the problem, Trina, when you are in a profession from early childhood, you've practiced it for 25 years by the time you're 20 something or 30, where most people think of retirement after they have been in a trade for 25 years, you're barely starting to find jobs and auditioning for jobs. Now, if you're here in the airplane, here we have jets flying on top, so sorry about that. But
No.
So the problem was that I had practiced for 26 years and I knew I was not good enough. So the big fear was, okay, if I go into nursing, which is a very demanded profession, in high demand all over the world, would it take me another 26 years to learn it well? People were doing it in 2, 3, 4 years, and I really didn't trust that I could, but I had to trust that I could, because I wasn't marketable as a violinist. So that was the switch that I said, I'm going to do it. I'm starting from scratch. I have excellent expectations of myself. I will change my mindset. And it wasn't an instant thing. It wasn't, I mean, school was great because I was always a very good student, but then transitioning into the job and communication with patients, with doctors and colleagues, it was a big, big shift in mindset with regards to my abilities. So that's how it gradually happened. But yes, the switch was the career change, definitely.
You said, it was a lot to consider and think about. And it is scary when you've had in your mind you're going to do one career lifelong and then decide to change. How did that affect your confidence? Were you disappointed that it wasn't going to have the longevity that you thought, or did you find a freedom in knowing that you were going to change and you had that power?
Both. At first, the disappointment was immense. It was like a week after I decided that I had to change careers, and I felt complete vacuum under my feet, in my brain. I was giving the concerts with the Syracuse Symphony Orchestra at the time, which subsequently bankrupted in 2011, unfortunately. But playing the violin made no sense to me anymore for that week when I had made the decision that I have to change careers. And then the confidence, the freedom became when came across when I started the classes for nursing school. I did excellent in these classes. I had no science base whatsoever. And so that really spiked my confidence, because I read between 8 and 12 hours a day, to catch up with people who had finished high school with some science base and in English on top of that, because I'm Bulgarian originally. So my science base was non-existent, let alone in English. So to catch up, I read all these hours, but that was very liberating, because my brain started working in ways that it had never worked before. Finally, some new subject matter, science, numbers. It was fascinating. And the things I was reading the most, math and chemistry, I actually passed with flying colors. But I always read the textbooks well before the classes even started, once or twice from cover to cover. That's why I was reading so many hours.
Goodness gracious.
That will help, though, because when you know that you're way behind your so-called peers, plus you're older than them, you can't make an idiot of yourself going to class and not knowing what you're doing. So that was the freedom aspect. And then once the experience hit with the job and subsequently with the investing, because that was the third thing I did after I left violin and studied medicine. In 2014, I went into real estate investing, and that was a whole other aspect, the financial thing, because I saw how many of the nurses lived and how they were treated by the corporations that devour hospital after hospital. And I made myself learn yet another so-called profession. Yeah, you go into investing professionally, but just the financial freedom aspect was huge to me.
Why nursing?
because it was in high demand. I knew I would have a job anywhere in the world. I liked biology as a child a lot. Now, in the specialized music school where I was from the 1st through the 12th grade, we only learned biology like 3 or 4 years, and it was nowhere near as serious as the way the ordinary schools children were learning it. But I loved animals. I loved anatomy, if you wish. And besides, I knew that nursing would take 2 to 3 years to complete the degree, as opposed to my 11 years in college already as a, I had earned a bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees in music, in violin, which I had defended my doctoral monograph in 2007, and in 2008, I decided I'm going to nursing. So school that didn't require 11 more years in college, yet in high demand as far as the job, and multiple opportunities to apply your skills in many types of nursing fields.
So have you touched the violin since you put it down?
No, ma'am, not since 2011, since I entered the workforce as a nurse, because I was a full-time nurse because I wanted to overcome the stress from the new job as soon as possible. Of course, that took years to complete, but I had the best intention. But, I played the violin. At that point, I had been a violinist for 29 years, and I used to practice between 7 and 9 hours a day, so you either practice or you don't. You got to have integrity, even towards your old profession. I can't just grab it for 15 minutes, 20 minutes and pretend that I maintain these skills. It just doesn't work that way.
Once you got into nursing, you're starting work and everything like that. That seems like plenty to keep your plate full. What made you decide to start dipping your toes into the real estate world?
I had a great mentor. I read 6, 7 books by Robert Kiyosaki before I ventured into purchasing one of the Rich Dad's online classes. I wanted the financial freedom, and he made it clear there are tons of ways to invest your money. I also knew I was a complete financial invalid because I had no clue about money. And I wanted to learn how it works because many of my nursing colleagues were flat broke, even though they had excellent salaries, and many of them had much better hourly rates than me because I was a beginning nurse. They had seniority by 10, 15, 20 years ahead of me, even 5 years ahead of me, much better paychecks. Yet they constantly complained that their money wasn't enough for whatever reason, and I couldn't comprehend how this was possible, since my very first nursing salary was way bigger than I had ever, on a yearly, much larger amount than I had ever earned as a freelance musician. So, and then I understood how people got themselves into bad debts that would not generate income for them, and there was a way to get into a good debt that would generate income for you. And that's what I learned from my mentor, and I resolved I want to have these choices. I want to be able to choose whether to work or not to work, not to be confined to a job to make ends meet.
At what point did you start writing?
Well, the idea of the book came in 2020, January of 2020. And the whole structure actually emerged in my brain in a matter of 2 hours.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
And I start writing, I finished it in 6 months. And then it took me a year and a half to edit, though, because when you write almost 400 pages, you see that you're repetitive. Plus, I'm not a native speaker, obviously. So I wanted to get rid of repetitions and say things differently in each chapter, because reinforcement works great for me. I know it works great for other people. And I probably edited it 30 or 40 times before I even offered it to a professional editor, my publisher and his editors.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what sparked that for you just to start writing?
Well, there was a couple of friends that suggested that I need to put my system into writing because they saw I was very successful, that I had already acquired financial independence, and I was an immigrant in America who came here with nothing, literally, but big hopes in 2000. And there I was in 2020. I could choose whether to work or not work after having switched careers dramatically and added 2 more careers to my portfolio. And they saw it, they said, look, you have to write this because many people have fears that you had. You were very unconfident because they knew me very well. They said, what happened that you all of a sudden decided you believe that you can do all these things? And I said, it was desperation, fear of poverty. And I got sick with my own creation of stories that put me down all the time. That's what happened. And they said, you got to write the book. And at first I didn't take it seriously, but then the COVID started in 2020. My father passed away the last day of 2019. And I said, well, I actually have some ideas here. Let's see what happens. And I was determined to write the book from the day I saw that scheme coming into my head, because it's the same method that I apply to all of the important 5 life aspects that works in each of them. And putting it into writing was a great experience. And whoever has read the book has really been grateful. And they said, yeah, they changed their lives in many, many good ways.
As a nurse during 2020, what was life like for you?
Well, it was interesting. I'm a home care nurse. I have been a home care nurse since 2013. That means I go into patients' homes. I work for an agency. They send me out to patients. I treated patients with all sorts of COVID symptoms because the hospitals would release them without them being completely healed. So patients were in their homes, and I just protected myself. I educated the patients. I never refused the patient because they were sick, they had a COVID infection. And the other cases that we normally have, I never stopped working. Many of my colleagues decided to take a break. I said, no, I'm working because I want to learn about this disease. I want to see the prevention methods. I want to see what the best early treatments of this medication. And of course, they were forbidden by the government, early treatments, because they weren't profitable enough. So I went through all this experience. I'm grateful for it. And like I said, it was business as usual, but with even more empathy to the affected families, to the patients, their loved ones, a whole different experience as far as understanding people's fears and how really fragile life can be for some people, especially those with multiple chronic conditions.
Even though you were interested in learning about the disease, did you ever just get fatigue from it all too?
I was really angry at the way the situation was handled nationwide and worldwide. I was angry beyond any description. I still am. I think there was a lot of lack of integrity in the scientific community and medical community. And just, you don't want to get me started on that, but fatigue, no, because you can't allow yourself to become tired when there is so much going on. And one of my principles is, I have several words that I have eliminated from my vocabulary. Tired is one of them. I don't use that word.
Okay.
Right now in our conversation, but I haven't pronounced it in many, many months and years.
Right.
It's a detrimental word, and I don't want it in my day-to-day communications.
When you get fatigued, or if you do, how do you replenish? Because realistically, a human being naturally needs to replenish and care for themselves. How do you do that for yourself so you're always ready to keep going?
So my spiritual handling of it is I seek inspiration in other successful people, but I'm very adamant about my fitness routine. I go to the fitness 4 days a week, and I spend a minimum of 2.5 hours doing vigorous weightlifting and cardio exercise. And there is no way around that. I don't compromise my fitness routines. They're extremely demanding. I've written extensively about this in chapter 6 of my book. I also see the energy is also maintained by my diet, because I have been a whole foods organic vegan for 6 years now. It will be 6 years in December, actually. Again, no excuses, no exceptions, nothing. And I eat extremely clean food. So when you eat like this, you have much more energy than the average person. And then add the exercise, because the diet and the exercise, they're not a substitute for each other. They go hand in hand, right? And it also helps you mentally. And the integrity that you build interacting with your patients, when they know that you stand behind your words, when you tell them, look, you have to eliminate that food and that food and that food. And then, of course, they ask you, do you eat these foods? And you say, no, absolutely not. Otherwise, I would not have the credibility to tell you not to eat them if I don't lead by example. And it's satisfactory. It really is, it helps in the profession when you see the patients appreciating that you are leading by example, and you don't just moving the air, talking to them what they should do. When you see they're extremely sick, and when they see somebody who's very healthy, telling them, look, if I can do it, you can do it. You obviously have to encourage people, And that also helps with the so-called burnout, because
Yeah.
I don't think I've been burnout. I mean, sometimes it's annoying with certain problems, but I wouldn't say burnout because that's a big word. And many
Mhm.
people like to use it just because it's fashionable. It takes a lot to be burnt out from what you're doing if you love what you're doing.
How would you say then, when you talk about stopping the violin, you weren't burnt out from that? It was just time to change for sustainability for your lifestyle. Is that right?
Yes, yes. I was not burnt out from the violin. I loved practicing. I listen to classical music to the present day every day. It is part of me, but it just was not practical anymore because I wasn't as good as I had to be, as I needed to be. Competition was tremendous, especially when the orchestra started dying out one by one. I mean, you're auditioning, competition is between 40 and 500 people. I've said this many, many times. You play behind the screen for 10 minutes. Thank you for coming. And it was just unrealistic. I was 32. And I said, if I'm to learn something new, it should be now, because 30 years from now, I'll have great regrets if I don't make this change now.
Yeah. So you started writing the book and it happened pretty quickly for you. What talk a little bit about your writing process. Did you just zoom right through it? Did you categorize? Tell us how you kind of went about it, your approach.
Categorizing. So I really tried to keep it very simple, which is in congruence with the title of the book. It really is simple, a holistic approach to self-confidence. So how you approach self-confidence holistically, for many people, when they hear the word holistic, they think health. But I think health, I think spirituality, I think your career, your finances, and your relationships, because finances and career are two things that people like to mix together, and they're not the same, because the career, that is how you learn marketable skills to be helpful and useful to society, whereas your finances is what you do with your earned money to grow financially and create assets that produce cash flow unrelated to your job. So you don't have to depend on the job, so you can work if you want or start your own business. It's your thing, but not to depend on somebody else to feed you. It's very important. So the holistic approach, if you want to be self-confident, to me, that was all these 5 aspects. I had done my absolute best to elevate to where I wanted them to be. And of course, they're a constant work in progress, but none of these is neglected. And this was the system. I knew that to progress in each of these, you had to recognize the details, the factors that prevented you from being where you want to be. So you have to do some housekeeping in all these 5 aspects. And again, that's one of the things that the steps I had taken, and I organized that. And that was the scheme for the book. And then aspect by aspect, I went back and forth. I didn't start necessarily with the health aspect first. I actually started with chapter 12, believe it or not, which was the relationship chapter. It comes to your mind at different times. When you have an idea, you put it down, then you place it in the right chapter or segment or section. But it was a very organized process, even though I didn't produce the chapters one after the other, but I knew exactly what was going to be where. And then I worked to fill these gaps. I was writing between 3 and 8 hours a day. It was important, and the same process was with the editing, because when you dedicate yourself to something to get it done, you need to put in the time. That's the important thing with anything you do, if you want to do it well. So that wasn't hard. The editing was the hardest part.
Yeah.
Because I'm not a native speaker, and even for native speakers, they've told me it is the hardest part, the editing. If you don't give up during the editing, you'll publish your book. So that's how it came to completion eventually.
When you think about, careers and our personal identities and self-confidence, do you feel like we tie those together too much? Our self-confidence, who we are, to our career?
We could. It's an integral part of our self-confidence, whether we're able to perform our jobs, our careers, our business well and stand out, so that we constantly are sought after, respected, and appreciated, and hard to replace. That is a very important part of self-confidence, but it's not everything, because if you neglect your health or relationships or spirituality because of your career, or if you're using your career to cater to a lavish lifestyle that you wouldn't be able to afford without your career, that's also not a good way to develop self-confidence. It's only a fifth of your existence is your career. And again, I tried to keep it as simple as possible, but I couldn't contract these aspects anymore because they're each individual while they're connected to each other. I know some other coaches that place the life into 15 categories. I think that's way overly complicated and nobody will pay attention to that, but 5 is manageable. Okay, so yes, that's a great question, Trina, because the career is a very important part of your confidence, but it's really not everything.
What is something we all could be doing better to lay a good foundation for self-confidence?
Well, you have to pay attention to your health habits. You can compromise your health because of friends, relatives, loved ones. Same with your, so that includes your nutrition, your fitness, your detox every day. These are the crucial steps towards good health, because there is a cancer epidemic in this country. There is a heart disease epidemic in this country. There is diabetes type 2 epidemic in this country. I mean, these chronic diseases with potential for multiple organ damage and highly profitable ones to a system that doesn't necessarily care for your health, but they like to manage your diseases, okay? So if you realize that, you understand that, and you internalize that it is 100% your responsibility to first and foremost take excellent care of your health. And then you can do everything else. But it starts with the health, because it's interesting, Trina, that that's where most people really lack the discipline, because they'll be okay with their jobs. They will do the jobs. Some of them will do as minimally as possible so they don't get fired, but they will do something about the work. Others are excellent at their jobs to the expense of their careers, health or relationships. But it's the nutrition and the fitness where many people atrociously lack discipline, and that's what gets them, and they get very upset when I start talking about that, because they say, well, as soon as I build some money and foundation, I'll do my health. And I tell them, no, it's all part of the same discipline, because you will see that if you really take excellent care of your health, you'll be just as diligent and even more attending to your career needs, to the needs of others in your career, and then to your assets, the growth of your financial foundation, your choices in life, and then the selection of your relationships. So everything is important. So there are many things that every one of us can do much better, but you have to be honest with yourself and sit down and say, okay, in each of these aspects, what's lacking, what's good, where do I start? All of them together, not just one by one, because there is always going to be something neglected if you prioritize just one. And I know it's more convenient at a glance, but it really is not practical.
I agree with you that health is very important. Can you speak just real quickly on how important it is to self-advocate for your health? Because like you touched on, our system doesn't necessarily set everyone up to realize how important it is to ask questions, to advocate for yourself, because most doctors are not going to be able to do that for you.
It just cannot be emphasized enough how important it is to be your own self-advocate. But to be your own good self-advocate, you have to be willing to acquire some knowledge. You can't rely on your doctor to tell you everything. That is not going to happen. Some doctors have different belief systems from yours. And you need to read books. You need to practice the best advice that you find for yourself, not just read about it and then forget about it. Say, oh yeah, that's a wonderful idea, and then never do it, because eventually when you get sick and chronically sick, it's already too late. I mean, the body can reverse any chronic disease. Pretty much 95% of the chronic diseases are reversible, but do you have the discipline? Do you have the perseverance, the integrity to do this? Because it's a process, and the longer you stay sick, the longer your mindset remains sick, and then you have to reverse that mindset, not to mention that your loved ones are also in the mindset that you're a chronically sick person. So it's a chain of events, and if you let it go that far, you really didn't advocate for yourself enough. And it is tremendously important to do. You have to read, but not just Google. You really should be reading many different schools have thought of with regards to health. It's not just what the government websites offer, because truthfully, it's not enough. It's not accurate. Many of the very successful doctors says, if you see it advised by government, please do exactly the opposite and you'll be much healthier. And it's a very cynical statement, but unfortunately, in 90% of the time, it is true. All right. So because many of the menus they recommend for sick people to eat, they simply keep them just as sick. They just control the symptoms. So self-advocacy involves a lot of commitment to learning, lifelong learning.
All right. Good, good. All right. Tell us where we can go to get your book and any other links that we can have to keep up with you.
So the paperback version is on my website, holisticselfconfidence.com. There is also an ebook version there. And in addition, the ebook is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple Books, and Smashwords with all the other stores that they distribute to. Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you so much for taking time to share your process with us, your story with us, and come back anytime.
Thank you, Trina. It was wonderful to be your guest. I appreciate you.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much. Be sure you're listening and watching at runradio.net.